This is Talk is Sheep, the official podcast of the Wild Sheep Society of BC, brought to you by Sitka Gear. Come along as we bring conversations that matter to you into the high alpine. This episode is sponsored by our conservation partner, Stone Glacier. Thank you, Sitka Gear and Stone Glacier, for investing in healthy wildlife and sustainable ecosystems.
All right, here we are, Talk is Sheep. We got El Jefe back on, Gregory, and today's a big day. We've got the one, the only, the legendary Tanis Barkman on the podcast. How's everyone doing today?
Well, good. Makes me blush hearing that for sure.
You are a legend for sure. Greg and I talk about it almost weekly. And honestly, some of my favorite podcasts are listening back to the shit you say. It's awesome.
Nice. Well, at least I got with you saying shit that I can say shit the whole time too.
Yeah, that word's on. That you're good for that word.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay, well, so we talked a little bit about we've done a few of these Mountain Ready podcasts and trying to get guys and gals geared up for sheep season. And Tanis is obviously highly experienced in the backcountry, kick-ass sheep hunter. Person that never says go even when they've lost their leg. So very, very impressive there. It's funny, guys still will call me up or talk to me like, holy dynamite, that story with Tanis is insane. Anyway, so anyone that's interested, listen to one of the last one with Tanis. I think you've been on 3 times, but that last one with Tanis is just like jaw dropping. But anyway, Tanis, what I was hoping to talk about today is, there's lots of experienced sheep guys that listen to this podcast, but there's noobs too, and there's kind of the in-between. I'd like to talk a little bit about the evolution of sheep hunting for you and kind of, you weren't even a hunter when you were young, I don't think, from what I recall. So, hunting was kind of new to you, and then all of a sudden you're one of the elite sheep guides in British Columbia. So let's just talk a little bit about that progression and sort of how you got the hook and what got you into it.
Well, I do enjoy watching the whole process and how it unfolded for me personally, because I was new to everything. Like, I was new to mountains and new to hiking. I was new to hunting. I was new to everything. I didn't have the proper gear. I was going up in like runners sometimes. And but the funny thing with me is that I'm such a balls out kind of person. Like, nothing, it doesn't really bother me. There was tons of times where Doran was like, oh, we can't, like, we'd see an elk or something and it would be like a whole entire mountain range away. And he's like, oh, maybe that elk's legal. And I'd be, well, let's charge after it. Let's go. And Doran's like, you can't do that. That's like a 10-kilometer pack out with your feet. He's like, that's crazy. But I don't know if it was because I was naive and I didn't quite know, or it's my bold personality, but things like that never scared me off. And so when it got into sheep hunting, it was like, I think, a lot of people can be intimidated by it when they first get up and after it, because I've witnessed it a ton of times with random people that we've kind of, gone or attempted to go sheep hunting with. And it's hilarious to me how many people talk themselves out of something before it's even in motion, because you'll see rams up high and they'll be like, grown men, my age, strength, abilities, whatnot. But they're just like, well, I don't know, it might, or if it rains, or we can't, or the pack out, or it might, and they just like talk themselves out of it. And I realize that I am a different person in that respect, because I just don't know if I have much of like, I don't know, fear installed in me or something. I don't know what happened. It got skipped in my creation, which just kind of works out great for sheep hunting, because there's a lot of times that you get, it's kind of scary, or it's super far away, or there's big pack outs, and there's a lot of demanding issues that can come into play, and you just kind of got to roll with the punches, And I was saying earlier to you, Kyle, that when I first started going after sheep, I was going with Doran, brand new hunter, barely even, like, I'd shot 1 buck to myself, basically nothing else. And Doran knew that my personality type was like the perfect partner for him, because he's like, this is awesome. Here's my new girlfriend. She's got her dad's hand-me-down 243. She's not scared of anything. She doesn't really give a shit if we're like drenched or in the rain or weather shows up. Like, I just could be the greatest sport. And then I also didn't actually want to shoot any rams or anything. I just didn't think that it was fair for me to chase the omnipotent, almighty mega species right out the gates. You know, it just felt like I needed to just see things and experience stuff first before I had the privilege of pulling the trigger myself. And I also didn't like shoot long range. I just knew I wasn't ready, so I was okay with that. But I absolutely loved the adventure side of it, and I loved the grind and the sweat and the gusto. And when you got way up high and into sheep country, it's just the most stunning, beautiful mountain adventures you could ever go on. They're at the tip top. I guess goats would be in there too. I mean, there's other species, but basically anything that lives right up at the tip top of the mountain, that's, it's full on. And so I laugh at myself when I first was going with Doran, because we would get up to the place and I loved all the things about getting there. And then, Doran would find rams. I had probably just a shitty pair of Nikon bird watching binoculars. Like, I don't know, they were 8-power. I'd try and I would find things, but I was like, when Doran found rams, he'd get so excited and I'd be all jazzed up too. And we'd be watching them, and it's super fun watching them, like, in their characteristics, like headbutting or straight arm ball hits, whatever they do. Like, they're crazy. They're super funny animals to watch. Where they can hike and climb to is outstanding, and they're gorgeous and they're massive and all the things, But for me as a new hunter, I laugh when I look back at it, because I would actually kind of get borderline bored. And I don't know if it's a thing for me to be shy about, to actually say that there was a point in my life where I was like, oh, I'd get about 2 hours worth, and then I'd lay back in the sun and I'd get into the snacks and the little candies, and I was just like, and then I'd pop back up and glass for a bit or look for other things. And when weather started getting colder, Doran used to always tell me, he's like, you got to stay out of sight. So I'd get I'd get all jittery, and I'd get like, want to bounce around, and my energy levels, I couldn't sit still for too long, and so he's like, you got to tuck behind, you got to, and have zero viz. So I would, hunker down from behind our glassing spot, and I'd get to a place where no animals could see me. I'd start doing jumping jacks, and I would roll around on the ground and get some farts out, or I don't know what the heck, so there is there are, when you're getting into sheep hunting and stuff like that, it can be kind of overwhelming, the amount of glassing that has to go into it. And it's definitely something that I've noticed as a guide, for sure. You get people that like book these hunts, and they know that it's this crazy adventure and it's awesome to go on. But many men don't actually realize, if it's their first or few times, that they don't realize that you got to glass for hours and hours and hours, and it's just, once the sheep fever got inside of my blood, and I actually felt like the deep passion that has never gone away since the day that it first entered my body. But from that moment on, now I can sit and glass forever in one spot. Like, you wouldn't hear a complaint. I don't need to eat any food. Like, I can just sit there and make my eyes bleed and stare at sheep's asses for days, and that's kind of what it takes. So that's something that not everybody knows if you're new and getting into sheep hunting, the amount of hours that a guy's got to be diligent about.
Holy dynamite. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, sorry.
But, it's awesome. But maybe let's talk a little bit about that. Okay, you talked about like you just born with that sort of ability to like just go on, like press hard, like crappy weather, be on the mountain and not give up, not like be fearless. And like I would argue that's probably the biggest killer of most hunters. It's not their conditioning, it's not their equipment, it's their mental fortitude, their mental toughness. So it sounds to me like you were born with it, right? How like, and you've guided like literally hundreds of people on these sheep hunts. But like, how do you get someone to get their brain around that? Like, and someone that goes with you on a guided hunt, they've got a bit of a benefit. Like you're pushing them, they're like, come on, don't be a pussy. And by the way, I'm a woman. So, like there's no way. Right. But for somebody that just goes out there the first time on their own, like, how does someone, cause I've been there. I'm like, I remember my first sheep hunt. I was like, I literally was like 600 yards up the mountain. I'm like, I'm done. I can't go any further. It's over. And then my buddy's like, dude, we've gone like 600 yards. I'm like, yeah, okay, fair enough. But like, how do you, what do you do to get guys and people motivated, and how do they get past that? What's the strategy around that? Beat Tanis?
Well, yeah, totally. Well, and I think, I don't know, like sometimes I feel like I can get really excited. I'm an excitable person, I get chatty and all the things. And I hike faster than the clients for sure. Someone told me that. They said you can never hike as fast as the clients because you'll just be like dawdling around in the valley bottoms all day. And not that you want to be a dick about it and you're not trying to be like an asshole, but you kind of like dangling the carrot of like, come on, buddy, let's go, let's go. Quite often I'll carry their gun. I carry way more water than them. They don't have a spotting scope. It's a classic story of guides. It's kind of hilarious in a way. And you just have to like coax them up and get them up there. But I feel like obviously with a guided hunt story, it's, these people have paid a lot of money. So it's not the same as a personal drive. They kind of have like 10 days to prove it. They've, spent probably the last 3 years convincing their wife why they needed to blow that kind of cash. They're just like, I feel like they're a little more jazzed up about the idea that it's like, okay, it's showtime. They've been waiting a while. They want to do it. But then you also have clients that are kind of old timers that have done it a bunch before. They're not even that fussed, and they don't mind taking 2 days to get up what would take us maybe 1 day, and sometimes you got to play with that too. You can't just pressure everybody. There's a little bit of a natural, you gotta suss out what everybody's all about. But I realized with me on a personal level, like going back a little bit to just inherent passion, before I was a hunter, I did all kinds of random wild things, like traveling Europe and taught English in Turkey when I was 18. And I was a huge snowboard junkie. And I feel like when you have the passion for anything, like it doesn't have to be just hunting or sheep hunting, but just the excitement of where you are and what you're doing. And I find just hyping that up on the mountain itself, not taking it for granted, not it doesn't have to be necessarily that you're hiking up after animals, but it's just the moment that you get to do that, and, having, as you said earlier, lost my leg, which it did grow back, which is great. But when you get things taken away from you and you don't have your physical abilities, you realize how special it is that you get to do those things, and I definitely think that getting people hyped up is all about just staying super positive. And I'm a huge fan of like ridgetop views, and I would do that as a pleasure. Like even without hunting or anything, I just absolutely love getting to the tops of mountains and, seeing the views. And I always want to see the other side. And I don't know, I think that itself should help hype up the scenario, getting people up the mountain. We're lucky that it's just so pretty. Like it's different if you're hunting bears and you're in thick alders and you're slashing around like, once you get up top, it's good. Life is good. It's easy walking. Best.
Oh, yeah, that's true, right? Like there's so many parts of sheep hunting that's tough, but then there's parts like, and you just mentioned two of them, like walking the ridge tops, like obviously not skylining, but walking the ridge lines and, and glassing and stuff like that. So there's a lot of downtime too, but even that is tough because you've got that mental game that you're playing, like training yourself to sit there. And like I'm gonna give a knock to my sheep hunting partner. He's notorious, man. It's like, no, we got to see what's over the next ridge. And I'm like, it's mostly a demotivation for me. I'm like, I'm lazy. I want to sit in glass, but he can't sit there. He just has to go. Anyway, enough about that. But I want to talk a little bit about motivation, Tanis, about like what is it about sheep hunters? So, is it about the views? Is it about the adventure? I know it's different for everybody, but like, you talked, you those first sheep hunts that you went on, you didn't even want to kill one. So it's not about the kill, right? There's probably some people that have to have a sheep on their wall. I'm sure there's that element too. But I feel like with sheep hunting, like when you go in deer hunting or moose hunting, you're like, no, I really want to bring some meat home. But can you talk a little bit about the motivations and what drives you? Because clearly in those early days, it wasn't about killing anything for sure.
Well, I kind of, when I very first started going up with Thorn, I was like a little bit sensitive. I kind of had a non-hunter. I was a vegetarian before all this, right? And I kind of had I didn't want to just fall into the grip and grin photos and the, need to prove yourself. as far as, it kind of drives me crazy when people are, when they say, oh, did you get your bear? Did you shoot your this? And they act like it's theirs. And that kind of mentality has always kind of driven me crazy. So when I was new into hunting, I was quite sensitive to all that. And I kind of gave Doran shit because I was like, man, we're hiking through everything, we're hiking through mule deer country, whitetail country, we're hiking through elk country. And like, we used to see elk and there'd be 6 points and they'd be like far away deep back in the drainage. And we'd pretend we'd kind of call for them a little bit and we'd play around, but then we'd be like, nah, forget it. And we go back up to sheep country. And I kind of like, I remember telling Doran, I was like, I don't really understand why it has to be that specific animal, why, like, and I could see in his eyes, I could feel his passion, and it was for sheep and it was for the grunt and the grind and the extreme part of it, And so I was always kind of curious as to why, what it is that drove people. And then I think as I started, getting up there, and then with Doran's first ram kill, it was so exciting. And okay, going back to that the first ram kill that I was ever on was with Doran for sure. And I told you earlier that at the start of the season, I actually convinced Doran and I said, hey man, like, let's just take whatever's available. Like if we see legal game, let's give it a try, because I just didn't want it to be almost a trophy mentality. I didn't want it to be just sheep. This is me as a new hunter just trying to explore. And I'm the kind of person, I think about everything. I don't want to just go blind. I just have to dig inside my feelings. And these were just the feelings I was having. So what ended up happening is we hike all the way up to this awesome drainage. We actually biked. We pushed our bikes. We biked up. Back in the day, me and Doran didn't even have thermarests or a tent or anything. We broke boughs as our beds. Zero idea of a pillow. That was like unheard of. And then we just brought an actual tarp, like a shitty green or blue tarp, and we'd string it up in between trees and make these little nests and stuff. And that's what I thought normal people did. Everybody was doing. Then we're glassing, and it's one of our favorite drainages. And then we see mule deer bucks. We see 2 of them. They're both legal. And Doran's basically, all right, you're a shooter. This is exciting. Let's go chase them. And we went up. We actually made perfect stock. That was my first big game mountain animal. Before that, I had shot a whitetail deer, but it was lower down, and it was like, from a truck basically. And so this was my first actual hike in total adventure and full effort mode. And so we shoot this this mule deer, and he's in velvet. He's only 3 on one side, 4 on the other. And now I dub him I call him my teenage boy in velvet pajamas because he's just this little dink. But like, I was super proud of him. We were so excited. And then so we end up breaking him down. We pack him all the way down. We get to the bikes. We bike. We actually had to stop. It was so hot. It was like September 10th opener. And we cooled the meat in the creek. Get down, we get all the way to town. We start telling the brothers and the friends. We're like, woo, got some meat. This is exciting, opener. Next day, we boogied up. We went back up because we left our camp and everything. So we go up to the camp, and it was like super awesome. There was some National Geographic action going on because we had this coyote fighting an eagle over my gut pile. And it was so badass. This coyote's like yelling and yipping and, and then he comes running and charging towards Eagle that's on the actual gut pile. And he is sort of scaling sort of a cliffy section. Eagle like busts into these couple big power flaps, goes right towards the coyote, grabs him by the back and throws him off the cliff. And I'm just like, holy shit. Wow. That was exciting. And then me and Doran, so there was so much noise. The eagles like screeching, the coyotes are yipping at each other. And me and Doran knew, we're like, okay, this bull right here has now been sullied, and it's a matter of time before grizzly bears show up, because it's like there's a lot of yelling and action and stuff like that. So we pack up our bags and we ripped around the side of this, like outside of that bowl and onto the ridge, and then rounded the corner, and we got inside. And back in the day, we only had topo maps, like actual printed maps. And so there's this tiny little basin, and we're looking at it, and there's this bomber sheep trail. It just goes like poof up the cliff on the other side, through cliffs on the other side of this tiny little bowl. And we glass for probably like maybe an hour or 2, but it's a small area to glass. And, on the other side was this little lake. And of course your mind is like, oh, that's where all the sheep are living. Let's go, So we end up putting the backpacks on, and we start walking like right into the middle of this rock slide. We had to be exposed to get through there. And me, brand new hunter, naked eye spots this big, huge ram, and he's on the ridge and he's skylined. And I was like, oh, stop dead in my tracks. I'm like, darn, oh, shit, ram on top, you know, and he's looking, and Doran's like, oh, that's a big ram, you know, and even me as a new guy, I knew that it was like big full curl. This thing actually would be a Boone and Crockett, but he's pretty broomed off. And so we're totally busted, right? We're just this ram Hawkeyeing us, and he's just like, you know, he's just, it's so obvious, it's so intimate. And so Doran's like, oh shit, okay. So we just walk straight out away from his vision, back around the corner. We, you know, hug the ridge line, and we kind of go back to our original spot. And the ram is just eyeballing exactly where we were. But we just tucked back around the vision. And all day long, this ram did not want to drop into this little dinky bowl. And he was with one sort of sporty, maybe 4 or 5 year old. And that guy's like hip hopping around, and he's like wants to drop in, and he can't understand why the old fart's just all cautious. And that guy did not let go of like watching the exact spot where we were busted. And then right at night, like right at dusk, he drops into the bowl, you know? And it's funny because when I look back at that, me being the sheep hunter, it was a really, really long time, because it was in the morning we got busted, and it was night that he was starting to drop in. And I was kind of like, you know, like eating snacks, hiding behind the ridge, doing whatever, right? And then in the morning, I don't know if I should continue this whole story. I don't know where I got into it. I might as well. It's a great story. So first thing in the morning, you know, we wake up out of our bough beds. We had to put rocks, you know, to hold us from not falling down the mountain. And then we crawl like commando style, you know, army style to the edge. And then I give Doran the sign language. I'm like, do you see him? Because he's ahead of me. And Doran looks back at me. He's just like, no. He's like, I'll crawl a little bit further. He crawls like a little bit just out of sight. I can just see the heels of his boots just on the little horizon. And he's trying to slink in there super sly. And like a minute later, full gunshot. I was like, oh shit. I'm like, shots are fired. You know, I missed the whole action. I came ripping around the corner, and then Doran was shaking, and Doran had a habit back in the day when we first started dating of always scoping himself. So he's like gushing blood out of his forehead for like, he actually has probably about a collection of 5 different scoping jobs right in smack dab between. He's gushing blood. Ram is like, he's been kind of like spined or hit behind the shoulders a bit. So it was kind of sad. He was like crawling with his front arms and dragging his hind leg. And then Doran just smoked him again and ended his life right there. But that was my first sheep experience. And that all happened. So that was like day 3 after openers. So it was my mule deer first. And so I kind of like, I don't really believe in luck and fate and all those things, but I told Doran, I said, going back to the start of the story, I was like, you know, I told him we have to take advantage of all the animals we see. So I keep saying that, you know, maybe that mule deer and the fact that we took advantage of legal game and didn't just go for sheep, maybe that's why the sheep gods, we always talk about sheep gods, we're like, maybe the sheep gods gifted us, you know, a really massive, nice, big first ram for Doran, because we, you know, didn't take for granted that that was the one and only thing that lives up there type of thing. So I always think that that's a neat first opener story. That year was pretty awesome. I got to be on 3 bighorn sheep for my first season.
Yeah, that's pretty epic for sure. You talked a little bit about.
You asked me. I just rambled into a big story. Sorry.
Oh my goodness! My questions are irrelevant here. You just talk. That's all that matters. But you talked a little bit early on about this reverence for sheep, right? Like you're just like, oh, I haven't earned it. I haven't glassed them. I haven't spent the time. I don't deserve it. I think you used those words. So, you know, I think like some people think, oh, I'm going on my sheep hunt. And I've been hunting for 3 days now. I'm entitled to take this ram. Talk a little bit about the reverence and I guess the respect for the species, because I feel like I really get that sense from you that you have this respect for the species. You've always had it. And I don't think all sheep hunters are new. Like some new sheep hunters maybe don't necessarily have that. And I think that's something we need to think about. And, you know, we always talk about, you know, take mature old rams and that sort of stuff. And, but I just like to hear a little bit more about that reverence you have for it sounds like all wildlife, but in particular wild sheep.
Well, there's always this saying, I don't remember exactly how it goes, but basically the year that you start sheep hunting is the year that your ram is born. So they say. So typically you got 8 or 10 years before you're meant to actually shoot your own first ram, you know? And for me, it's like, I would rather learn and be cautious. And I'm maybe it's the girl inside of me, but I'm kind of sensitive to taking lives. Like, I don't really I'm not all about World War III, just gunshot pile, just shoot them everywhere, anywhere. For me, I actually think that it's very important that you know your weapon, that you're very sighted in, that you take things seriously, and that you know when you can make good shots. And, it's really important to do that. So alongside with all of that, which I wasn't quite ready for in general, and it was right around that year, like that year was the first year that I could feel the sheep fever. It was really exciting. So then I started so I got my first 308. I started shooting up to 400 yards. I just wanted to make sure I was a lot more ready, and I did that in the off season. So I just think that when people walk into sheep hunting, I mean, there's a lot to it. And I think, it's important that you should learn how to shoot in the mountains, right? You can't just go from like flat bench shooting sandbag perfection and then think that, and I learned that when I shot that mule deer. So that very first mountain animal I had, I was shaking like a leaf. Dorn had to talk me, it's just the classic, like, woo. And now as a guide, I really, really, really enjoy being a guide for the one specific reason that I feel like I almost have an out of body experience, because when I see someone shaking or I see something isn't right, because you see the animal and you look at your client and you can just tell that they aren't steady and they aren't right. And some people are amazing at it and they're completely dialed, and you can almost pick up that vibe instantaneously, and you're like, okay, this guy can figure his own shit out. He's like totally dialed in. But for some of the newer hunters that you have to make sure you get good rest and all the things. But I always remind people, I'm like, if we're taking lives, we got to do it right. Like you can't just pop shots off. That being said, there's tons of stories that I do have where those things do go down. Like, I'm not saying that I think as I've kind of, experienced so much of the hunting world, I've definitely gotten a little desensitized and a little more dull. And sometimes I realize that, like, you have to seize the moment. And sometimes everything isn't perfect, but you're like, just do it anyway, so there, I can talk now about, how dialed in a person should be, but I do realize there are moments where, things get a little loose, and you always hope they work out,
Let's talk a little bit about, so early days, like when you're out on the mountain, and sort of the evolution, some of the things that you've learned, like maybe glassing strategies, or just like picking your battles, where you're going to set up. Are you camping down low and climbing the mountain every day? Do you like to camp up top? Just different stuff that's maybe evolved with your experience in the mountains. Maybe for somebody that's been on a sheep hunt, but maybe doesn't have a ton of experience, and something that maybe could help them, some of the things you've learned along the way, Tanis.
Well, for me, with the glassing respects, I definitely have a couple of tricks that are, everyone's got their own little style and stuff like that, but I always start far away and then go zone in. So basically, I'll always start with my binoculars, and I use 10 power, 10 by 40s. And I always start, and you see juicy, gorgeous sheep terrain, you're in the money hole, that they could be around. You see sheep trails, right? You want to be in and around sheep shit, obviously. Like it's like any animal you're hunting, you want to be, you're in the zone when you see the physical sign of their existence. And then I always start with the binos, and I go speed glass first, because as everybody knows, rams are given kind of a curse to them and a blessing to humans, but they got that nice white ass. So if ever a sheep is feeding, it's quite obvious. It's easy to pick up. You get better at it, and obviously any moving animal is easier to find. So I usually start with low power binos, and I do like quicker glances, and I go top to bottom. And with stone sheep especially, you got to look lower than you think, because that surprised me when I went to northern BC, because when I was doing a ton of bighorn stuff down here, I think they're pressured that much more. I do think that they are hunted, and their sort of survival tactics, having the escape terrain, they like to stay kind of in human, what do you call them? Like not ideal terrain for humans, it's so when I went up north, I was actually so amazed when I saw this band of 14 rams, and they were like super low down. Like I couldn't really believe that. And I was like, oh, this must be what normal sheep look like when they're not harassed by humans every single day of hunting season. So that would be my tip. Start with binos. You go broad, and you kind of give it the quick swoop. And then I'll usually stay with binos, and I go like more in detail. I'm picking away at rocks. Trying to find better rams is so much more difficult, obviously. And then usually I whip out the spotting scope, and I just, you start picking away. in pretty strong detail. But I would say if you know that it's a ram patch and you've seen rams there before, like quite often you just skip it all, go straight to the spine scope, and you always go back, like creature of habit, back to the exact spot where you saw them, a year or two ago. And so there's different techniques for sure. And the thing with glassing, one of my personal guidelines that I like to stick to is I always like to see terrain for either a full whole entire evening and then a full whole entire morning. To me, that's I would even do a little bit more depending on how much terrain I'm looking at. But for me, especially as a guide or whatever, it depends if you're running out of time or not. But I would say that it's really important to catch both evening feeding time and morning feeding time when you're looking at like a broad, like mountain range or hillside or whatever it is, because if you don't give it enough time and you think that you've glassed it all, like any experienced sheep hunter knows that you can watch something for like 25 hours and then out they come, or they'll pop up over a ridge, or they'll just show up, or they hidden, like there's so many folds that you don't, and I find a lot of times with clients when I'm guiding them, they do get impatient because for them, they're like, okay, I have 10 days, time is ticking, let's go. We've seen everything, or they glass from like noon till 4 in the afternoon and they want to go somewhere else. And you're like, no. Like that is absolute foul play up there. Like this, you really have to see a whole face I would say for one whole evening and one whole morning, or vice versa. That's usually my hot tip. That's what I would stick with as a basic like starting point for glassing. Don't run away too soon, basically, because I've been surprised so many times. Everyone has.
Yeah, no, that's awesome advice. And are you up like camping up top? Are you trying to stay high as much as you can, or are you? Yeah,
I'm a yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
You can find sneaky spots, and I've been in so many predinky-winks where you gotta like build your own bed out of rocks and moss and build things out. Like I like sleeping right in the zone, move slow, cover everything up, I don't know. Yeah, you get used to knowing where you are kind of off of skyline and where you got little pockets, or you can sit in the shade during the day, then you're less visible, obviously, than bright sunlight shining on your bodies, And I mean, unless the sheep are really close, if you're looking at a mountain that's like, away from you or a hillside, like typically they won't be like crazy alarmed and scared unless you're, running around like a complete idiot. But it's just when you're close and up front, yeah, if you see sheep and you're really close, you definitely do not want to be moving at all.
Can you touch a little bit for our listeners? And this is one of the things that I'm still really trying to figure out is like sheep behavior. Like, okay, so you see sheep, what are they going to do? How do you make a play for them? And then also touch a little bit on that. Like, okay, so, the Doran scenario where you're face to face with a ram, like how do you manage that? Like, what are some of your strategies in that scenario? So, we had a scenario where a ram busted us like 20 yards, and I've heard like don't give them direct eye contact, just kind of look down, look away, and don't move, that sort of stuff. So
20 yards, you're pretty screwed. That is a tough one. 20 yards is like, I mean, depending if you're hiding behind anything at all, but 20 yards for any animal in the wilderness kingdom is like a complete bust. That's a tough one. I mean, it's hard because my theories and with my experience is that you've got 3 factors, right? You've got vision, you've got sound, and you've got wind, which is smell, right? You can kind of fake the viz, right? Like if a sheep sees you, depending how close, and they bust you moving around, if you stop entirely, hunker down, like don't move at all, depending how close. Like I've been pinned by goats for like, like standing in a crouched position for like an hour, beating sweat, bugs biting, everything. You cannot. And I was like telling my client behind me, Blaine, I was like, don't you dare move a muscle. Like we are busted. And then he slowly, like after a serious hour stare down, then he would kind of feed for like 15 seconds and then come look at us again, all like, what's going on, and he was super suspicious. So I let him do that a few times. And then one of the times he turned his head to feed, I was like, okay, Blaine, on the next time when I sit down, you sit down with me. And it was just like, which was really exciting. We ended up getting the goat. It was super fun. But so I would say visibility, you can kind of fake and you can kind of like make an animal sort of, doubt themselves. They can be like, oh shit, did I see something? And like I told you that first ram story with Doran's ram, it's like, he knew he saw something. he was like not into it at all. And we left, and he only felt comfortable like probably 10 hours later, and then slowly worked his way into this little bowl. But I mean, they will stare you down for a really long time if they've busted you and if they had some kind of visual, but they're not sure. So you can kind of fake that a little bit. Sound, when you start getting into the range of sound, obviously you're close. And then a big giveaway is like rocks rolling and stuff like that. Like it's one of my biggest fears when you're tippy toeing into a stock and you're getting closer and closer and you got some old fart behind you or just anyone. And it can be any, like I've done it too, where you roll rocks. And I mean it really does suck. But if you're caught in those moments, you can just pin yourself to the rock, stop moving. Typically whatever you're chasing, if it's rams, they'll like stop and eyeball your way for a long time. So you don't really want to, but the one thing is obviously your scent and the wind. You can't fake that. And I find when you're busted on that forefront, it's the worst of them all. Like sheep can flush out of the area entirely. Like if they smell your dank ass, sweaty 8-day unshowered body into the hunt, like it can ruin everything for sure. So that would be my biggest. That's always the biggest thing, when you do find animals, the first absolute number one thing you have to do is check the wind because you can't fake that. And if you're busted hard, So would be the biggest tip that obviously I would give for not just sheep, but just about everything.
When you get busted by the wind, like what's your plan after that? What do you typically do?
Depends how busted, like if you can visibly see them running away and you have like a site to where they're going or a place, or you see them go over a ridge. I mean, I typically like to give it some time and just stay on the spot and keep glassing because I have had rams come back before. I've had rams flush out of a bowl and I'm like, oh shit. And your best bet is, but that one wasn't wind though. That was visibility and that was, yeah, but they did end up kind of rolling around, but it was like a long time afterwards. It was like a whole entire day. But if you can see where they went, I mean, that's the best case scenario. And typically in sheep country, you do have wide open viz, but it's tough chasing scared rams. But that being said, sometimes they do actually stick around and it's not that big of a deal. And, every situation is very different. It's definitely something that I've learned as a guide is to say, well, rams always do this. Happens because then you get you get shown up entirely. You're like, oh shit, like typically 90% of the time that would never happen, So yeah, there's different scenarios for everything, obviously. But if you're busted with the wind, that's a tougher one. But if you got viz and sound, sometimes you can just wait it out. You just gotta lay down, hunker down, don't move. Be super diligent about that. And you can wait it out. And rams typically, they will circulate back. I have found that, I mean, it's always different, but I would say within 3 to 5 day loops of feeding circles kind of thing. So you'll catch them in one bowl and they'll stay there for a while and then they'll just meander off. And then they're in their next little bowl over and their next little. And I find you can get sort of patterned up. And sometimes rams, with bighorns typically down here, I found that in the heat of the day at the start of the seasons and stuff, they bed super high in the rocks. Most sheep will bed high in the rocks during the day because the bugs are so atrocious and horrible that there's less bugs for sure way up high in the rocks, So I have definitely noticed frequently that they will bed during the day in the rocks, in the shade. Sometimes they'll find little caves and whatnot, and then they'll come down to their feeding benches, or sometimes it's just wide open, guts of a bowl or something, and then if you can pattern them up and you can kind of catch them, usually they'll sort of keep that same pattern and habit going for a few days at least. Sometimes they'll stay there. I don't know. I'd say a few days for sure. If nothing's bothering them and they haven't been spooked out, then you can definitely. And so sometimes it's definitely very tactical, mindset to meet them, and so if you're watch them day one. And the thing is, if you're out of range and you're just watching them, you have time and you don't have to get all impatient and run after them. You got to make game plans. You got to hunker down. If you see that the rams come back to the same place Like, let's say you're super far away and you're like, oh my God, that ram just, it came back. Then you can make big plays and you can get yourself into position and sort of meet them there. That's definitely happened. That happened on my first bighorn that I shot. We just knew they were going to feed back down to this one spot, and we just got really close in, and then we could just see them coming from their bedded, shaded, rocky abyss, or up high, and came down and fed right to us, and it was pretty awesome. It was neat.
So Tanis, okay, so you're making a play on rams, and so I get the consensus is get up above them, come down, get over top of them, obviously stay concealed, as opposed to come from below. Talk a little bit about any exceptions to that, or like what's that?
I wouldn't say that that's always the move, though. Like
yeah, let's talk a little bit about like above or below, and then also, have you ever done like the Trojan ram thing where you're dressed in white and stuff? Like I know guys have done that, or with goats and stuff too. Have you ever seen that done before?
I've done it with goats. Me and Doran, I bought these 2 white business shirts for grown, oversized men from the secondhand store, and we both put them on and we snuck in there. It was pretty awesome. Yeah, I've definitely done it with goats in the snow. Super camouflage. It's fun. Actually, with wild boars too. We did that in northern Saskatchewan, and we put all white. Doran was rolling around with a white painter suit, like those disposable. He's wearing that over his, winter gear. It was pretty funny. It definitely really works for sure.
Cool.
I wouldn't say that I myself have gotten into like costumes so that I look like that animal, but I would say that I've definitely worn white to blend in with snow and stuff like that. Like when me and Doran were wearing those white, businessman shirts, we weren't doing it so that the goats thought we were goats. It was just that we were hunting in full winter and we were white and the background's white and everything was white. So that was just like our white camouflage. But I mean, everyone, the thing with mountain hunting and with sheep, and most hunters know this, that you have thermals, right? So you have daytime thermals. I don't know what the exact terminology is. So basically, first thing in the morning, the wind, typically large percent, I'm going with 90. I'm not a scientist, but we'll say 95% of the time, the wind from the mountain circuits and whatnot, they come from up high and they come down at you. So that is prime time to sneak up on animals from below. And you can almost guarantee, unless there's kind of like swirly winds and whatnot, but quite typically thermals in the morning are very strong and predictable. So you can, hike up, and I have many stories of that for sure. And that also kind of coincides with patterning up the rams. So it's happened many times where you actually see rams, they're coming into that basin, they're going to be there first thing in the morning, first light. So we've had some epic trophy stalks that start at like 2-3 in the morning, and you're marching through the night. You're trying not to use a headlamp at all. You're being super quiet, and you're just hiking blind up the guts of who knows where, trying to get into position. And that definitely works. And then you got to watch, because obviously when the sun hits the peaks and things change and you can feel it. So it's this super shitty thing when you attempt that move and you don't get there in time, because the thermals can change on you pretty quickly. And then all of a sudden the valley bottom is sucking air and swooshing it up the mountainside. So that is, a technique you can use, but you want to make sure that it's going to work, because there's a lot more terrain always than what it looks like when you're glassing from the bottom, right? And then sometimes you run into obstacle courses that throw loops into whatever. And me and Doran have actually done the early morning thermal game, and we got there way too early. And this was one of the last days of bighorn season, and we were way too early. And we didn't want to change our undershirts for some reason. I don't know what happened. It's the first time, and I think it's the only time, that me and Doran actually huddled together and shivered for a whole entire hour, because it's always coldest right before dawn, but I'll never forget it. And Doran's a warm-blooded creature, and I was like, if he gets cold, we're fucked. Like he is, I was like, oh no, he's cold, he's shivering, I'm going to die. But we ended up just huddling together and shivering it off, because we were just too early, right? Because we didn't want to miss the boat on those thermals. And then that also can work for evening plays when you do come from above, which quite often I think tends to be a more used practice, just because of timing and whatnot. Nobody really likes to do the night hike up guts and whatnot, but I do find that quite typically you can approach from the top. And you got to be careful of swirling winds, obviously, because winds can be quite unpredictable. Like, I actually don't like it when you get those lazy hot summer days. I do not like those at all. It's just like lofty wind that's just blowing around, and there's no real direction. I kind of like it when you have just a bit of wind coming from somewhere going somewhere else. So thermals, I mean, definitely winds are very important to play. So there's definitely different techniques to use at different times of the day.
Yeah, right on. What else do we need to cover? What else are little bit of strategy about getting the hell off the mountain. So, when do you leave your ram? So, you talked a little bit about that. There's times where, you have to have this sort of respect for the animal, and, you're not always going to be walking off the mountain with maybe it just doesn't make sense. You're not going to shoot a moose 10 miles from, although you said you do that too, but,
not a moose anymore. The elk, maybe. No, moose, I got like under a kilometer in me. It's like 10 trips of 100 pounds sometimes. It's crazy. That's too much. I'm too old. Are you talking about like leaving the whole entire hunt or just for the day type of thing?
Yeah, just more so like, you getting in over your head, and you talked about some sheep hunters tend to do that. You're like, you see sheep, maybe they're too far away, and going to make a play on them. You're like, oh, like, there's a big ram or whatever, and then it's like, but hey, you still got to get out of there. You got to be safe and do all that sort of stuff. So, just a little bit about sort of strategy and even like I guess hunt planning too. And I think probably for you in particular is like if you're I guess on your own hunt doing your own thing, and you've maybe got 10 days, but you could stretch it to 12. But if you're on a guided hunt, the guy's got to fly out on day 12 or day 10. That probably affects things as well, too. So just a little bit of the hunt strategy, if you will.
Yeah, it's definitely like the closer you get towards the end of the hunt, you definitely have to keep in mind your home route and your migration. I had a goat hunt with Dan Watto actually once where we shot it just so far away. This guy was really desperate. It was his father's inheritance that he got from his father, and it was a very special hunt and all the things. And we took him through the ringer. It was actually a bow hunter. It was a Pope and gun because he had his bow with him. And his first attempt, he just blasted the rocks right in front of him. It was kind of shitty. And then he grabs the rifle and he's shooting it. World War III breaks out. We're like, oh, holy fuck, we end up getting the goat down. Things were great, but the pack out was insane. Like, I couldn't walk for 3 days afterwards. I felt like I'd given birth to triplets. Like, I just was, and so those type of things. And if I didn't have Dan Watto, I don't think I could have done it. I don't think I would have done it. Dan Watto is a Viking, and he actually carried me with my whole backpack full of goat meat. It probably was at least 100 pounds, I would say. Me and my boots and everything. He hoisted me up over his shoulder and carried me across a like knee-deep river for him. He's a true Viking. He saved everything that day. But yeah, so you really want to be careful of how far away you're getting. If it's day 2 of a hunt, like I'm not afraid to hike for a while, but you do have to be cautious of the shape of your client, obviously, or your hunting partner or whoever, and just, make sure that it's possible, because you can't be wasting meat and stuff. You don't have the right to do that, to hike way beyond your league, shoot an animal and ditch his meat, his body, because you just chose to get out of your, ability zone. And that's not fair. And that goes to the respect of the animals too. If you're in over your head, don't do it, because I just do not believe in that. It gives such a bad name for sheep hunters. It's so insulting, I find. Like, you should never do that, It's not what we're doing out there, and that just goes to show that you'd rather prove, get the head and prove it to the buddies rather than to actually have made it a truly successful hunt in regards to full respect to that animal. And then I would say, there's a few times where we've definitely had cliffs can be the biggest factor going, for sure, where you are like, oh no, you can't that ram's going to take 1,000-foot tomahawk. Like me and Dorn have definitely had many times. And it's not to say like if you have more time, then you just wait, right? So the rams can change position and move. They don't always stay in these crazy rocky zones. So quite often if you can wait it out, but if you have time, don't get all trigger happy thinking that that's the only chance you're going to get. If you have a few days and you're sitting there pretty and the rams haven't smelt you and you're out of sight and you're watching them, like just give it time. They can move to better benches or lower down or different scenarios, because we've had it, not with me, but we've had friends, and it does happen with goats quite a bit, where the horns blow off and they chip and they break and you're looking for chunks on these, rocky, and I haven't been back into the true super steep vortex of like steep rocky chaos, but I have a feeling that I might be a little bit scared or leery, like looking up and watching for rocks and stuff like that. But it is very dangerous. There are moments. And then me and Doran one time had a goat. It was the third goat I ever shot, and I piled it up, but it actually ended up going behind this like razor edge sort of spine. And so we couldn't see where it went. So we did like, it was probably the most scared that I had been without getting on that injury there, but it was the most scared I'd ever been, because we were just going into this basin and it was super steep, slick snow, and there wasn't a lick of fucking growth or tree or anything that could ever stop your fall. And it was a definite 60-foot cliff that you'd get sucked into and blown over. And I was just terrified. I was trembling. My voice was weak. I was glad I had Doran with me. Like I was kind of mumbling and not really making sense. And then we get there and we hike up over and we look down the spine, and it just so happened that the goat had like hit there, but then he ended up sliding. So he slid on the other side of the spine. So we had to go do the like chute of death, came around and underneath the cliffs, and we were super lucky because that goat had slid for like a whole entire kilometer in our advantage, and he didn't lose a horn. Because when I got up to him, his horns were all, poked down into the snow, and as I'm walking up to him, I was like, oh shit. I was like, I don't know, maybe he won't have all of his headgear. So there's a few, you really got to play it safe, and you hear about people with really terrifying rescues and rope belays, and I just don't think it's really worth it, and maybe I'm lucky because I get a ton of opportunity. I've been in a ton of awesome places and have good memories, but it just isn't really worth like it. If it's too steep and rocky and crazy, your animal can blow apart. Their body can rip apart. You can lose their horns. A whole bunch of bad things can happen. And you yourself as a human, that it can, and you'll try, right? You'll try and rescue that animal. You'll try and get down there, and you'll definitely find yourself in these terrifying pickles, I have quite a few stories. I could get talk like all night long. I have a really crazy one for sure. That was, it could have been really bad, but we ended up getting out of it. That was good.
Well, you got to tell us the story now. But one thing I do want to touch on before we wrap up, and I want to hear your story, but then on top of it, I want to hear a little bit about, you had the injury, I guess, 2 years ago now.
No, 19 months, year and a half, just over.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I'm counting the days.
So what's some of those strategies? Like you had a really that was a freaky weird thing. But like for mountain safety, like what are some of the major things that you're thinking about, other than the obvious, like don't go in stupid places?
Well, we all look back on that day of that accident, like it's kind of was a very classic day where it's really cold nights and then really warm, late afternoon sun. So it was pretty obvious that, anytime you're in that steep of terrain and you got like, anytime you have water moisture that collects inside of cliff bands and whatnot, and as it freezes at night, obviously it expands, it pushes the rocks around, and then as that heat shows up, so everyone knows in springtime mostly is when mountains start to crumble and they fall apart, and it's always because of like water, whether it's frozen or moving or doing whatever. That's when you're so had I looked back on that day and where we were and in the position and the type of rocks that were above me, I could have been a lot smarter too. We just didn't have the fear factor. There's 7 of us. You get cocky, you go on a million sheep hunts. No one really thought of it, but it kind of was sort of obvious later that we're like, oh shit, that definitely was like party time for the mountains, and we were in a very precarious place with no awesome exits really. But yeah, no, you definitely want to respect the mountains for sure. And I mean, I'm shocked that there aren't more stories like mine, like more rock movements and pileups and you do hear of some, like I've had people reach out to me for sure. There's definitely some wild stories, but of all the sheep hunters we know and of all the community of everybody involved, it's actually surprising that I don't hear about that more often, to be honest. But yeah, no, safety's a big thing. I always have a big, strong carabiner in my pocket, and then I always carry, and it's only paracord, but it's meant to hold whatever it is, like 360 pounds or something. So I always carry that just in case, because I've done tons of bag belays. Sometimes in your backpack, this actually happened on a desert sheep hunt. It was me, Roberto, and Grant, and the client and his nephew couldn't even come with. Dustin was there too, but he turned around and went back with the clients because they not super slow, they were slower walkers. So we just made a game plan. We're like, they can start heading out. Me and Roberto and Grant, and it was gnarly. It was balls out. Like I was terrified. And then what happens is on the way down, your backpack's so huge and you got all the meat and all the things and all the gear and the stuff, and then you run into the problem of now you can't scale down that rock face because you got 1.5 feet of gear sticking off you like a little turtle shell. And so sometimes you can't walk down hands on. So there you can run into problems where, because I personally think it's safer if you can face forward sometimes. But yeah, no, that was a big Perdinky wink for sure. And I've been in a few of those. I'm sure every sheep hunter has at some point, and you gotta, yeah. And sometimes you just can't help it. You just all of a sudden you're there and you're like, oh shit, this shouldn't be what we're doing. And, you think about your wife and kids at home. You're like, oh, sorry, even my mom, she always told me that sheep hunting is dangerous. And I was like, no, it's not. It's not dangerous at all, And when that happened to me, she's like, ha, told ya.
Oh my goodness, that's too funny.
I won't show my mom a whole bunch of pictures. This was a few years ago. And I was like showing her all these beautiful pictures. It was Nick Marciano. He had taken a bunch of them. And I was like, look at all these pictures. They're so beautiful. And my mom was like very distracted and didn't want to look, which wasn't like her because she's usually quite supportive and all the things. And then I had to just ask her point blank. I'm like, Mom, what's going on? I was like, these are like the most gorgeous. This is my life. This is like, it's so beautiful. Look what I'm doing. And she's like, I'm just so scared for you, and she's not normally like a pansy or but she just had this moment of like, I just can't even look at those pictures. It terrifies me. And I was like, oh shoot. Sorry, Mom.
Awesome. Cool. Are you going to tell us your pickle story, or was that your pickle story with on your desert hunt?
Sorry, the pickle story was rams that we were chasing. Just so happened that shots were fired, and it definitely was a miss now that we look at it, but we had to go check. And we were kind of dinglebats. It was me and Doran and our buddy Joe, and we were we were like, oh, well, let's just downsize a ton of our gear because we're basically just going to go up there and then we'll come back down. We'll check on the body. We'll see. And if it's a pack out, we'll just pack it out, as is. And so we ditch a bunch of our gear. We did all bring sleeping bags and thermarest. I think we just ditched our spotting gear, to be honest. So we go up there and it is steep and it's crazy. And we're just like crawling with our fingernails up some of these like rocky chutes and things. But the thing is, we had sheep fever. We're like, we shots were fired. You have to go check it out. So we get to the spot, we look, there's zero blood. We were confident before that it was a miss. And, so then we're up there and we're just like, oh shit, well, it's totally getting dark. So let's just set up our little meager camps right here. The three of us couldn't sleep together. It was so steep that we each had to make our own little sheep beds out of rocks and things. Joe was like sitting upright. Doran all of a sudden pops his thermarest like a bad pop where it's just like all air is exited in like 3 seconds. It's just like, we're like, fuck. And then right at that time, no word of a lie, my knees started shaking and I was like, oh, what's this? And we have this storm rolling in and the wind just changed and temperature dropped. It got this cool wind started coming at us and we're like, holy shit. Like all of a sudden this thunderstorm was on us. And it is my one biggest fear. way more than grizzly bears, way more than, cow moose with a calf or anything. Like, I am terrified of ridgetop super exposed electrical storms because I've been in a bunch and they've rocked me to my core. And it's just something happens. I become like a lab rat in a cage. I gotta go, and then so sure enough, this storm's just on us, boom. And it's like blowing like crazy, hailing, windy, rainy up into us. We try setting up a sill tarp. It's half blown away. We're huddled together. Doran claims that me and Joe fell asleep briefly at one point. I don't remember. I felt like I was awake all night too. And then we get up in the morning and it passes and we're like, holy shit. Like, that was one of the most, scary places I'd been. Like, it was sheer rocks and cliffs and we were just pinned right on the hillside and got rocked, It was terrifying, super soaked to the bone. And smart little Tanis, which I'm like, take the best credit for, I tied tiny little pink flagging tape on the way up in these strategical little spots. Cause in the morning we were very fogged out and socked in. And we're like, oh, this is crazy. Like, we are like in this cliffiest band of who knows what. And so we're trying to pedal our way out of there. And it was so awesome. Like, it was just like these little beacons of pink fluorescent light that were like, oh, there's our route, because we could have easily been super fucked out. And that was well before all of us carried like specific GPS tracking and stuff. And now with the InReach, you can set it to like, logging your intervals frequently so that you can actually see all of your steps so you can go back down. But yeah, no, that was one of the scariest of my exposure storms in the middle of the night. None of us will ever forget that. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's freaky. Wow, cool.
You're actually thankful that hunt that we didn't shoot the ram. We're like, this would be really tough. Like, we were belaying bags and it was bad news. We're like, thank God we don't have a ram right now.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Let's touch a little bit, but just wrapping up here. Did you took all of last year off? You went to Mexico to help out, but didn't hunt, right? You didn't guide, right?
No, well, yeah, I mean, I went and I was able to hike up to this palapa, they call them palapas. They're like dried palm leaf from, palm trees, and they make like a thatched roof kind of concrete pad because you have to hide in the shade. It's like, it's impossible to just be out. Not even the lizards are out in the sun all day, So they make these palapas, but basically it was like, I don't know how many meters or peanuts really. But for me, big accomplishment. And I didn't know what it was up against because I had just started walking again. So I brought my walking cast, I brought my crutches, which I wore through the airport, which is awesome because they escort you through there like a princess. You're just like, come on, get through all the... But then, yeah, so the first time I went up there, I had the crutches and the walking cast. But no, I was quite useless for sure. But Roberto had a substantial injury too. And then Dustin Rowe, our boss, he actually had a luggage carrying airport injury where he blew his little pectoral out from doing absolutely nothing. So the three of us were kind of gibbled. There was a bunch of other people, but we got to do tons of glassing. So I've actually been on quite a few sheep hunts in my injury. I had one here, down southern BC last year. And it was really, really awesome because the boys were going to hike into this basin that you couldn't see from the road. And that's sort of where the rams potentially could be that we were sort of watching. And then it was socked in and it was thick cloud and it was early in the morning. And then we're just sitting in our truck and the rain's pouring and stuff like that. And as soon as it slightly lifted, I just, rolled the window down and got the binos out and I just instantly saw him. I'm like, there he is. That's our full curl. Like, he was like an inch legal over both sides. And so I was so stoked because I, got to radio everything in, and same with that other hunt in Mexico. And then this year also, we also got to be a huge part of the glassing and the play on everything. And so in the time that I've been injured, I've been on 3 successful ram hunts. That's pretty good, and I'm starting to get way better. And I actually so this year I'm going up north and I'm going to be Doran's Wrangler, which I'm actually really looking forward to. But I don't think I'll be quite ready for the true grind of like the full 10 days. I think I could do little tidbits, or if I didn't have to bring all my camping gear, who knows? And I was surprised that my injury took that long. I honestly thought 6 months I'd be back at it and doing everything. Like, I did not take it as seriously as it was. That's for sure. But it's coming.
So, yeah, so you're feeling good now. You're feeling, you're not 100% confident, but you're 90% there. Like you're
well,
back.
I'm confident that I will be there, and I know that I will be, but right now I just don't have the endurance of all day, every day. That's the only, like, I can put on a wimpy sort of pack. Like, I wouldn't be able to do my usual carry 12 liters of water, spotting scope, tripod, all the guiding gear, thermarest, the things, and then sheep down. Like, it's just, and they spend too much money for me to be like, we're just going to take today off because I don't think I'm a little sore, you know? So I'm not quite there. I'm actually really excited about just getting up there. And the thing is, same thing as what I was saying before, I'll still be able to glass a ton for Doran, because first sheep hunt, Dustin was telling me that I'm going to be, you know, able to glass and help and do a bunch of stuff, because it's sort of, it's sort of, what do you call them? It's like obtainable terrain for me to be able to see. And then after that, me and Doran are going to go with horses, and it's just us, and we're going into this area that we know quite well. And so I'm super excited because I'm 100% going to be guiding all day long. And Doran's really excited too, because he's like, oh, usually we don't have like full tilt. Like I told Doran, you can't beat the guide out of me right now. Like I'm going to be so excited. So it's really going to be advantageous for sure for me to be like able to get behind the glass and stuff, and then radio him into things. So I'm really excited. I'm really excited.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So are you guys going up? Obviously, if he's guiding, you're wrangling for him, you guys are heading up for the opener. You'll be up there like early July or mid-July.
Yeah, we'll be split up for the first one. I'm going to co-help guide, just sort of tag along with another guy for the first one. And Doran's going to do a fly-in hunt, I think, somewhere. And then after that, we're going to have 10 horses and just us two, which is really nice, because other years, me and Doran are both guides. We each have our own wrangler, and then we each have our own clients. So we end up having like 18 horses, a bit of a gong show. We kind of have to like scramble for, you know, like it's not a scramble, but I mean, when you have, you know, that two different hunters going into the same place, like you have to come up with a game plan where you got to split ways and get away from each other, right? Which is possible, but I'm really looking forward to the fact that him and I don't have to compete with each other or like claim who's going where, who's taking what, you know, honey holes. We can just like be together. And no, I'm so excited.
Are
awesome.
You going to be capable of going in the backcountry and not going balls to the walls?
Well, actually, it was exactly today that I was just, because I just did one of my biggest days on my foot, and it was on Monday. Me and Doran went and cut trail for this outfit. And it was like pretty intense. It was like 20 kilometers. It was quite steep terrain. It was like, and I just kind of got these boots that I've been working on. Like I got some substantial problematic areas, you know, that really need attention. But we were bagged and we balled out of there. We actually couldn't get to our destination. We were like 750 meters away, because we just, you know, it's such a neglected trail, which is really fun. We really love that stuff. But we sort of marched our way out of there, and it was a full grind. Like we were up quite early and we came out, you know, late afternoon, or it was like early evening. And even Doran's like, holy shit, my feet are bagged, you know, and I was really, really impressed. It felt so good to be able to like hammer out a real day of hard work, you know. And I was tender, and it was the first time that I'd iced my foot in a long time, because I used to have to ice it like so much, you know. And now it really doesn't get that way. So I'm really excited. But I do have problem spots. Like it's a life injury for sure. Like there's some things I will not be able to get away from, but I do strongly believe that I will be guiding sheep next year for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Right on. Well, Tanis, thank you so much. Always epic talking to you. So much fun. And
started.
So Greg and I were messaging, and I'm like, oh my God, this is gold. And he's like, we got to do this once a month. Like, oh my God. Yeah.
Oh my God. Are we going to have things today? No.
Epic.
I feel bad. I feel like one of these times I got to interview you guys and ask all your stories and stuff. I don't even.
I've got no stories. I have nothing that's interesting.
You said you had your knife on your little necklace, something, and you were walking around and stabbed yourself in the chest or something.
Oh yeah, I got idiot stories. I've got some of those, but nothing interesting. So, yeah. Epic.
I really, now that I have a, you know, like a massive pile of Ram stories, you know, and I really love each one of them, and they're super cool memories, you know. And I've actually wondered, because I've asked myself before, because I told Doran, I said, maybe at some point what would my life look like if I stopped eating meat again or something, you know, or what if I went back to being a vegetarian, or I didn't want to hunt? Because I really do love photography as well. And I was like, maybe I could be a photographer. But I just told Doran, I said, I truly don't believe that I would find, or that anyone would really find, as much crazy gusto as when you're truly hunting. Because when you're hunting, you do things. Like, I don't think I would ever risk like, there's no way I would do all the things that I just told you about, all these crazy predicaments, to go get a picture of a ram on a hillside like that. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's something about that drive that's so, and it can only be accomplished with hunting, I think, because I don't know how. I mean, I'm sure there's some crazy photographers, but most of them hang out in national parks where all the big genetics are anyways, and taking pictures with these mega cameras from the trucks, which is totally fine and super cool. But I think the only way to really go balls out for rams is to be hunting them, I think.
That's awesome. Yeah, I totally agree. So many people say we'd never be here if it wasn't for hunting, right? Why would you? Like, if you want to go take pictures of big rams, go to the park, like you said. You're not going to go out in the middle of nowhere and spend all this money, time, and effort you're just not going to do it. So.
And I think that I don't think the drive would be there enough. I just simply don't think that there would be, enough. You'd talk yourself out of staff, be a little bit of a drizzle. You're like, yeah, come back tomorrow or whatever, like the things we do for sheep are crazy, you don't even think about them. Like, there's so many times you get in these predinky-winks where you're just like, whew, like, there was no reasoning. We're just here. Now we're here. We got to get out of here,
Yeah. So you talked about all these ram stories, and you think about all these memories, and like, what's the first thing that pops in your head for a ram story? Like, is it your ram? Is it a client's ram? Like, what story? Is it Doran's ram, the first one? Which one?
That's a tough one. As soon as you said every little like indicator, each one popped up its own. When you talked about Doran's ram, like, yeah, and then my first ram, yeah, and then a guided client ram. Yeah. So I have. Well, I mean, my ram was really exciting, and it was kind of interesting because Doran was he self-proclaimed himself my backup shooter like instantaneously, because I had missed a ram, and I talked to you about catching, beating the thermals and going up and getting to rams before. So I actually didn't have the best gun, and I didn't have the best turrets. I was still a new hunter, but this was the first year. It was actually the first year that I had true sheep fever. I got drawn for a moose tag, and I got drawn for an LEH goat tag, right? And I ended up getting both of those, but it was still the year that I missed a ram, because we're hiking up in the pitch black, and I slipped in the creek at one point, and I didn't want to lose my position as shooter. So Doran turns around with his headlights. What was that? And I was like, oh, I just hit the barrel on the rocks a little bit. It was nothing, fuck, total wipeout. And there again, I talk about, like, we talked about how you have to be a responsible hunter and stuff. And that totally kicked my ass later, because the rams were at like 340 yards. I had just gotten these custom turrets. I was so excited. I had it dialed in. I had a perfect rest. And then the rams were all spirited and sporty in the morning, being all playful. And they started like whipping around and going in circles. And then they came really close, and they were at 170 yards. So I blasted the turrets back to 200, and I'm just like, okay. And I had such a nice rest, and everything was great. Totally shot right over his back, and it was like devastating. Like, I was so emotionally crushed. And like you say, you go through all this effort, you put in all these miles, you do all of this shit. We bagged our balls out. We got 2 hours of sleep. All the things, and it all boils down to one little second. And then I basically had to stay on the mountain, and I just cried I would wake up with pools in my eyes, on my back, and I'd roll over and dump them out. And all of my non-sheep hunting friends are like, oh, don't worry, you'll get another chance this year. And I'm like, you don't understand, and it was a really, it was like this 176 golden, just beautiful. But then, so Doran all of a sudden became my proclaimed backup shooter. Like, he just didn't even give me a choice for a little bit, And so on my ram, I told him, I said, Doran, I'm fine. I want to just shoot him myself. And for a while, I went through a phase where all of the animals I was shooting were always at 380 yards for some weird reason. So this guy's 380. I'm like, I'm so comfortable with it. Custom turrets. We got like, everything's dialed in. We're fine. You got the angle composite, rangefinders, obviously, like everything, because it was a super steep, straight up shot. but yeah, he let me have at her, so that was really nice. It was good. And it was, he did shoot afterwards, just as a little, the ram was hit and he was wobbling around and Nora just pops one off. And I just looked at him and I was like, just stop it. Like, I'm fine. So that was a really fun one. For sure.
It's there's something about sheep that you don't, maybe for your first one or something, but I don't know. It's just like, most things like you want to go and harvest yourself, but for sheep, there's something special. There's that, and you see it all the time, like on the social channels too. Like everybody's out there. There's 5 or 6 guys. Maybe because there's so few opportunities, but like some of my best sheep hunting stories and memories are, I didn't take the sheep. It was my buddy that took one, right? So
that counts. Just as awesome. There's no problems, no shame in that. I have no problems with that. I actually love guiding, and I have no problems not being the shooter, to be honest. I just really want them to make good, clean shots, and to know their weapons and to do it right. But I have no problems with that, Like I thought in the beginning it was really hard because I get emotional when the rams are leaving, like the ram head. So if we have a successful hunt and you go back to camp and you're partying with the ram head and you're eating sheep back straps and you're eating tenderloins and you're eating and you're just gorging, and quite often like the hunters will leave you meat, like they see how excited I am. I just don't think they have it in them to like tear it away, so they'll usually leave me at least a back. And then all the things, and then there comes this moment where it's like, okay, time for your hunter exchange, and you're like, oh no, you're like, this is the last time I get to see the ram. And I actually get like kind of fucking weird. I get kind of emotional and just give the thing a little hug and couple pets, smell its horns one more time, and then just see, But it doesn't bother me. And we got a bunch. We had actually a hunter send us a really nice replica, and so we do have a replica of a stone sheep. That's good. We have quite a few ram heads in the house, so that's fine.
Super cool. Right on. Well, Tanis, we've put you to work tonight. I know you love talking about this stuff, and we got to do it again. Let's do it. Let's do a quarterly one or something, seriously, because there's so much stuff to talk about. It's always a magical mystery tour when we get you on the channel here. So, thank you so much for everything. Appreciate you.
You guys are awesome. Fun.
Hope you have an epic fall this fall as well. So
thank you. I do too. I'm really excited. Looking forward to it. I'll tell you all the stories afterwards too.
Can't wait. Let's get you right off the mountain and be safe out there, for crying out loud.
Yeah, I know. Well, I won't be hiking too high, so that's not true. I don't know. You never. I still got a month to like hammer into my foot here, so I might just all of a sudden be up there.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay.
See ya.
Nice work, guys. Thank you.